My name is Victoria, and I'm 34 years old. I never imagined that the moment between life and death would be the one where I'd finally understand the truth about my family. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room were fading to black when I heard my sister-in-law Amanda's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Don't waste your time on her. She's not worth saving." Those words, spoken as my heart monitor flatlined, became the catalyst for everything that followed. They say that when you're dying, your life flashes before your eyes. What they don't tell you is that sometimes you're conscious enough to hear the people around you reveal who they truly are. As the paramedics worked frantically to restart my heart, I was trapped in that strange liminal space between consciousness and oblivion, unable to move or speak, but somehow still aware of every word, every sound, every terrible revelation happening around my failing body. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. To understand how I ended up on that emergency room gurney, fighting for my life while my brother's wife wished for my death, I need to take you back 18 months. Back to when I thought I understood my family, back to when I believed that blood ties meant unconditional love, back to before I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can harbor the deepest resentments. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, the youngest of 2 children. My brother Ethan was 4 years older than me, and for most of our childhood, we were remarkably close. Our parents, Michael and Susan Reeves, ran a small but successful printing business that had been in our family for 3 generations. The plan had always been simple and understood: Ethan would eventually take over the business, and I would pursue whatever path called to me. There was never any resentment about this arrangement, at least not from me. Ethan had always been passionate about the family business, spending weekends and summers learning every aspect of printing, from traditional letterpress to modern digital techniques. I, on the other hand, had dreams that pulled me in a completely different direction. I wanted to be a nurse, to help people, to make a difference in individual lives rather than running a business. After high school, I went to nursing school at Oregon Health and Science University while Ethan stayed local, working full-time at Reeves Printing and slowly taking on more responsibilities. Our parents were proud of both of us, never playing favorites, never suggesting that one path was more valuable than the other. Sunday dinners at their house in the suburbs were filled with laughter, stories about our weeks, and the comfortable warmth of a family that genuinely enjoyed being together. I graduated with my nursing degree when I was 22 and immediately started working at Providence Portland Medical Center in the intensive care unit. The work was demanding, emotionally exhausting, and absolutely fulfilling. I loved the challenge of critical care, the precision it required, the way every decision could mean the difference between life and death. My parents would tell their friends with obvious pride that their daughter was saving lives, and Ethan would joke that I got all the glory while he just pushed ink around. Everything began to shift when Ethan met Amanda Carlisle at a business networking event 3 years ago. She was beautiful in that polished, deliberate way that came from money and careful cultivation. Tall, with auburn hair always styled perfectly, wearing clothes that screamed expensive without being ostentatious. She worked in marketing for a large tech company in downtown Portland, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned their place in the world. Their courtship was intense and relatively brief. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in an elaborate wedding at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. I was the maid of honor, standing beside Amanda as she married my brother, genuinely happy for them both. She seemed charming, ambitious, and clearly in love with Ethan. At that point, I had no reason to see the warning signs that were already there. The first hint of trouble came about 3 months after the wedding. I had stopped by my parents' house for our usual Sunday dinner, but Ethan and Amanda arrived separately. Ethan came straight from the print shop, still wearing his work clothes with ink stains on his fingers. Amanda arrived an hour later, dressed as if she were attending a cocktail party rather than a casual family dinner. Throughout the meal, I noticed her making small, cutting remarks about the house. "The wallpaper in the dining room is very vintage," she commented with a tight smile that made it clear vintage was not a compliment. "Have you ever considered updating the kitchen? These cabinets must be from the 80s. My mother, who had always been gracious to a fault, simply smiled and changed the subject, but I saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes. After dinner, as we were clearing the table, Amanda pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, her voice low enough that the others wouldn't hear. "Ethan mentioned that your parents have been talking about retirement." "They've mentioned it," I confirmed, stacking plates in the dishwasher. "They're both in their early 60s. They've earned some rest." "The thing is," Amanda continued, and I noticed a sharpness in her tone that I hadn't heard before, "when they retire, the business will go to Ethan, obviously. But I need to make sure we're all on the same page about expectations." I straightened, confused by where this was going. "What do you mean?" "Well, the business is quite valuable," she said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "The property alone, right here in Northwest Portland, must be worth over $1 million. Not to mention the client list, the equipment, the revenue stream. When your parents step down, all of that becomes Ethan's responsibility and his asset." "That's always been the plan," I said slowly, not understanding her point. Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to make sure you're not harboring any expectations of splitting the inheritance. The business is Ethan's. You chose a different path, which is fine, but that was your choice. It wouldn't be fair for you to suddenly claim half of something you never contributed to." I was so shocked by the accusation that I actually laughed. "Amanda, I have no interest in the printing business. I never have. I'm happy with my career, and I would never try to take something that Ethan has worked for his entire life." "Good," she said crisply. "I just wanted to establish that clearly. You'd be surprised how family dynamics can get complicated when money is involved. I've seen it happen in my own family, and I won't let it happen to Ethan." The conversation left me unsettled, but I tried to dismiss it. Maybe Amanda was just being protective of her new husband. Maybe she had experienced family financial drama that made her cautious. I mentioned it to Ethan a few days later, expecting him to laugh it off, but instead, he looked uncomfortable. "Amanda comes from a family where there were a lot of inheritance disputes," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "Her parents went through a terrible situation with her uncle trying to claim part of her grandparents' estate. She's just being careful." "Careful about what?" I pressed. "Does she really think I'm going to try to steal the family business?" "Of course not," Ethan said quickly, but his tone lacked conviction. "She's just making sure everyone's expectations are aligned. You know how business-minded she is." I let it drop, but the seed of unease had been planted. Over the following months, I began to notice other small things. Amanda would find ways to exclude me from family events, suggesting that certain dinners or gatherings were just for the business side of the family. She would make comments about nursing being a noble profession, in a tone that suggested she found it quaint rather than respectable. The real turning point came 8 months before the incident that nearly killed me. Our father had a mild heart attack. It wasn't life-threatening, thank God, but it was a wake-up call for both our parents. During his recovery, they made the decision to retire within the year and officially transfer ownership of Reeves Printing to Ethan. I was genuinely happy for my brother. This was what he had been working toward his entire life. I visited my father in the hospital daily, using my medical knowledge to help interpret what his doctors were saying, to explain his treatment plan, to reassure my worried mother. It was during one of these visits that I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I had stepped out of my father's hospital room to get coffee from the cafeteria. When I returned, I heard voices coming from inside and paused just outside the door. It was Amanda and Ethan, and they clearly thought they were alone with my sleeping father. "I still think we need to talk to your parents about formalizing everything legally," Amanda was saying. "Not just the business transfer, but making sure Victoria can't make any claims later." "Victoria would never do that," Ethan replied, but he sounded tired, like they'd had this conversation many times. "You don't know that," Amanda insisted. "She sees how successful the business has become. Once your parents are gone, what's to stop her from claiming she deserves half of everything? Family loyalty only goes so far when there's money involved. She's my sister, Amanda. She's not some scheming opportunist. She's a single woman working a middle-class job," Amanda said coldly. When she sees the value of what you're inheriting, the house, the business, the investments, don't you think she might reconsider her noble lack of interest? I'm just protecting what's ours. I felt like I'd been slapped. The idea that Amanda saw me as some kind of threat, some future problem to be managed, was deeply hurtful. But what bothered me even more was that Ethan wasn't shutting down the conversation more forcefully. He was entertaining these paranoid theories about his own sister. I walked away before they could discover I'd been listening, my coffee forgotten. That night, I lay awake in my apartment, trying to process what I'd heard. Part of me wanted to confront them directly, to lay out all my financial records and prove that I had zero interest in their inheritance. But another part of me was deeply wounded by the implication that my relationship with my brother could be reduced to monetary calculations. In the end, I decided to talk to my parents about it. I visited them a few days later, when my father was home recovering, and told them everything I'd overheard. My mother looked troubled, my father angry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That woman has poison in her heart, my father said bluntly, which was about as harsh as I'd ever heard him speak about anyone. Ethan needs to set her straight about our family. My mother was more diplomatic. She comes from a different kind of family, Victoria. Money was clearly a source of conflict for them. Maybe she just needs reassurance. Reassurance about what? I asked, frustrated. I've never asked for anything. I've never even hinted that I wanted anything from the business. I know, sweetheart, my mother soothed. And we know. We'll talk to Ethan and make sure he understands that this kind of suspicion has no place in our family. They did talk to Ethan, but whatever was said only seemed to make things worse. Ethan called me a few days later, sounding defensive and angry. Did you really have to run to Mom and Dad about a private conversation you weren't supposed to hear? A private conversation about me, I shot back. About whether I'm planning to steal your inheritance. How am I supposed to react to that? Amanda was just being cautious. She didn't mean anything personal by it. It's completely personal, Ethan. She basically called me a gold digger waiting to pounce. There was a long pause. Look, things are complicated right now with the business transfer. There's a lot of stress, a lot of legal stuff to navigate. Can you just give us some space? Space. That's what my relationship with my brother became over the following months. Space and distance and an uncomfortable tension that had never existed before. Amanda had successfully driven a wedge between us, and Ethan seemed either unwilling or unable to see it. The business transfer happened smoothly. Our parents officially retired, signing over Reeves' printing to Ethan in a ceremony at their attorney's office. I wasn't invited, though my parents had wanted me there. Ethan said it was just a formality, and didn't require the whole family to attend. I knew it was Amanda's influence, but I didn't fight it. What was the point? My parents moved to a smaller house in Beaverton, closer to the hiking trails they loved. They seemed happy to be free of the daily responsibilities of running the business, though my father kept close tabs on how Ethan was managing things. From what I could tell, my brother was doing well. The business was thriving under his leadership, and he'd even expanded into new areas of specialty printing that were proving quite profitable. I, meanwhile, focused on my work at the hospital. I'd been promoted to a senior position in the ICU, leading a team of nurses and handling the most critical patients. The work was demanding, often heartbreaking, but it gave me a sense of purpose that my increasingly strained family relationships couldn't provide. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday in November, the kind of dreary Pacific Northwest weather that makes you want to stay inside with tea and a book. I was finishing a 12-hour shift, exhausted but satisfied with the care we'd provided to a particularly challenging patient who had stabilized under our watch. I was walking to my car in the hospital parking garage, my mind already on the hot shower and comfortable bed waiting for me at home, when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see a figure approaching through the dim lighting of the garage, and it took me a moment to recognize Amanda. She was soaked from the rain, her usually perfect hair plastered to her head, and there was something wild in her expression that immediately put me on alert. Amanda? What are you doing here? I asked, genuinely confused. We hadn't spoken in months. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice shaking. As she got closer, I could smell alcohol on her breath and see that her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying. Are you okay? Is Ethan all right? My training kicked in immediately, assessing whether she was in crisis. Ethan's fine, she spat. Everything's fine for Ethan. Perfect, successful Ethan with his precious family business. I took a careful step back, my instincts telling me this situation could turn dangerous. Amanda, you've been drinking. Let me call Ethan to come pick you up. Don't you dare, she hissed, moving closer. This is between you and me. It's always been between you and me. I don't understand what you're talking about. You think you're so much better than me, Amanda said, her words slightly slurred. Poor noble Victoria, the selfless nurse, who doesn't care about money or inheritance. But I see through you. I've always seen through you. Amanda, please. You're not making sense. Let me help you. Help me? She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the concrete structure. You want to help me? Then stay away from my family. Stay away from Ethan and your parents and the business. You're not wanted. You're not needed. That's the alcohol talking, I said gently, reaching for my phone to call Ethan. You don't mean that. What happened next occurred so quickly that I barely had time to process it. Amanda lunged forward, trying to grab my phone. I stepped back instinctively, but my foot caught on the curb separating parking spaces. I felt myself falling backward, my arms flailing for balance I couldn't find. My head struck the concrete pillar behind me with a sickening crack that I both heard and felt. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, a white-hot explosion that obliterated all thought. I was vaguely aware of hitting the ground, of Amanda's scream, of the warm wetness spreading beneath my head. Then everything started to fade, sounds becoming distant and muffled, the dim lights of the parking garage growing dimmer still. I must have lost consciousness, because the next thing I was aware of was motion and voices. Someone was shouting for help. There were running footsteps. I tried to open my eyes, tried to speak, but my body wouldn't respond to my commands. I was floating in a strange gray space, neither fully conscious nor completely unconscious, aware but unable to act. I've got a pulse, but it's weak, a male voice said, close to my ear. I recognized it as belonging to Marcus, one of the emergency room physicians I'd worked with. Severe head trauma. We need to move her now. Is she going to make it? A different voice, female, filled with panic. It took me a foggy moment to realize it was Amanda. We're doing everything we can, Marcus replied. Did you see what happened? She fell, Amanda said quickly. She just lost her balance and fell. I tried to catch her, but it happened so fast. That wasn't true, some distant part of my brain insisted. She lunged at me. She made me fall. But I couldn't speak, couldn't correct the lie. I could only listen as I was loaded onto a gurney and wheeled through the hospital where I worked, now as a patient instead of a caregiver. The emergency room was a familiar chaos of sounds and smells. I'd been on the other side of this countless times, the one giving orders, starting IVs, monitoring vitals. Now I was the body on the table, and it was terrifying in a way I'd never imagined. I could hear people around me, feel hands on my body, but I couldn't communicate, couldn't tell them what I was experiencing. BP is dropping, someone announced. Pupils are unequal and sluggish, another voice added. We need a CT scan stat, Marcus ordered. Possible intracranial bleeding. I felt the gurney moving again, wheeling through corridors I knew by heart but couldn't see. The sounds around me began to fade even more, becoming distant and dreamlike. I was slipping away, I realized with a strange detachment. This was what my patients felt like in their final moments, this odd combination of fear and resignation. Then I heard voices that shouldn't have been there. My brother Ethan, breathless and panicked. Where is she? Someone called and said Victoria was injured. She's going for a CT scan, a nurse explained. Severe head trauma from a fall. A fall? Ethan's voice cracked. How did she fall? Your wife was with her, the nurse said. She's in the waiting room if you want to talk to her. The voices faded as I was moved into the CT scanner. The machine hummed around me, taking pictures of my damaged brain, quantifying the injury that might end my life. I tried to hold on, tried to stay present, but the darkness was pulling at me with irresistible force. When I became aware again, I was back in the emergency room, but something was very wrong. The sounds around me had taken on a frantic quality. Machines were beeping urgently. People were shouting. She's crashing. Marcus's voice, no longer calm but edged with panic. No pulse. Start compressions. This is it, I thought distantly. This is how I die. In the hospital where I worked, surrounded by colleagues who were now fighting to save my life the same way I'd fought to save countless others. I felt strangely peaceful about it, which I understood intellectually was probably a bad sign. They say that acceptance comes when the body is shutting down, when the brain knows it's over and stops fighting. I was floating in that gray space again, aware of the activity around my body but detached from it. That's when I heard the voice that would change everything. How much longer are you going to keep this up? Amanda's voice, cold and clear, cutting through the chaos. She's gone. Just let her go. Ma'am, please step back, a nurse said firmly. I'm her sister-in-law, Amanda insisted. I have a right to be here. And I'm telling you, Victoria wouldn't want this. She worked in the ICU. She knew when cases were hopeless. This is hopeless. You're just going through the motions. We don't give up on our patients, Marcus said, his voice strained from the physical effort of trying to save me. She's not worth it, Amanda said, and the venom in her voice was unmistakable. She's not worth saving. She never was. Just let her go and stop wasting resources on someone who doesn't matter. The words should have devastated me, but in my strange detached state, they clarified everything. This wasn't grief or panic speaking. This was pure, undiluted malice. Amanda wasn't afraid I was dying. She was hoping for it. She wanted me dead. Get her out of here, Marcus ordered. Security. You can't remove me. Amanda protested. I'm family. You're interfering with patient care, Marcus shot back. Remove her now. I heard struggling, Amanda's protests growing fainter as she was pulled away from my bedside. The medical team continued working, chest compressions creating a rhythm I could feel even in my disconnected state, medications being pushed through my the defibrillator being charged. Clear. The shock made my body jerk, and for a moment, the gray fog cleared slightly. I could feel pain again, which I understood meant I was still alive. We've got a rhythm, someone announced, relief evident in their voice. BP is coming up. Pupils are responding better. I was coming back, pulled out of that gray space by the desperate efforts of people who refused to give up on me. People who, unlike Amanda, believed I was worth saving. As consciousness gradually returned over the next hours and days, would piece together what had happened after that moment. How Marcus had refused to give up despite Amanda's protests. How Ethan had arrived just in time to hear his wife telling the medical team to stop trying to save his sister. How he had stood there, frozen in shock, as the truth of who he had married finally became unavoidable. But in that moment, suspended between life and death, all I knew was that my sister-in-law had revealed her true nature in the clearest possible way. She had looked at my dying body and seen not a tragedy to prevent, but an opportunity to seize. And somehow, impossibly, I had been aware enough to hear it all. The first real thought I had as I clawed my way back to consciousness was not about surviving or gratitude for being alive. It was a crystal-clear realization that nothing in my family would ever be the same again. Amanda had shown her hand, revealed the depths of her resentment and hatred, and there would be no going back from that. I didn't know yet what the aftermath would bring, what consequences would follow from those terrible words spoken over my flatlined body. I only knew that I had been given a second chance at life, and with it, a terrible gift, the absolute certainty of who my real enemies were. The machines around me continued their steady beeping, monitoring the life that had almost slipped away. My brain was damaged but healing, my body broken but being repaired. And somewhere in the fog of trauma and medication, a fierce determination was taking root. I had survived Amanda's malice, both the physical assault that she would claim was an accident and the verbal assault that revealed her true nature. I would recover. I would remember. And I would make sure that everyone knew exactly what kind of person had married into our family. The first thing I became fully aware of was pain. Not the sharp, explosive agony of the initial injury, but a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to encompass my entire skull. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a constant reminder that I was alive, though perhaps not in the way I had been before. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, weighted down by what I would later learn was severe swelling and the general trauma my body had endured. When I finally managed to force them open, the world was a blur of white ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights that sent spikes of pain directly into my brain. I groaned, or tried to, but the sound that emerged was more of a weak rasp. Immediately, there was movement beside me. A familiar voice, my mother's, thick with tears and relief. "Victoria? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" I tried to turn my head toward her voice, but the movement sent such a wave of nausea and pain through me that I abandoned the effort. Instead, I managed to move my eyes, finding her face hovering above mine. She looked like she'd aged 10 years, her face drawn and pale, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes. "Mom," I whispered, the single word taking enormous effort. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently. "Thank God you're awake. Don't try to move, sweetheart. You've been through a terrible trauma. Just rest." Over the next several hours, as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I learned the extent of my injuries. Severe traumatic brain injury from the impact with the concrete pillar. A skull fracture. Bleeding in my brain that had required emergency surgery. I had been in a medically induced coma for 3 days while the swelling in my brain went down. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, but there had been no guarantees. "You flatlined twice," my mother told me during one of my more lucid moments, her voice breaking. "The second time, they worked on you for almost 15 minutes. The doctor said it was a miracle you came back." A miracle. Or perhaps it was sheer stubbornness, the determination of medical professionals who refused to accept defeat, who believed I was worth the effort despite what Amanda had told them. The memory of her words came back to me in fragments at first, then with increasing clarity. "She's not worth saving." The cold certainty in her voice, the absence of any grief or concern. "Where's Ethan?" I asked when I could form the question. My mother's expression tightened. "He's been here. He's been very worried about you. He's just stepped out to get some coffee." There was something in her tone, a careful neutrality that told me there was more to the story. But I was too exhausted to push for details. Sleep pulled at me again, and I surrendered to it, my last conscious thought being that when I woke up again, I would need answers. When I next opened my eyes, the light outside the window suggested early evening. My father was sitting in the chair beside my bed, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he paged through a magazine without really seeing it. He looked up the moment I stirred, his weathered face breaking into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "There's my girl," he said softly, setting the magazine aside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed, my voice stronger than before but still raspy. "Not far from the truth," he said grimly. "The neurologist says you're making good progress, though. Better than they expected." I studied my father's face, seeing the worry lines etched deeper than I remembered. "Dad, what happened?" I remember Amanda being in the parking garage, and she was upset about something. But after that, it's all fuzzy. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Amanda claims you slipped and fell. That she was there and tried to help you, but you hit your head before she could catch you." "That's not what happened," I said, the memories becoming clearer even as I spoke. "She was drunk. She came at me, tried to grab my phone. I stepped back and tripped, but she was the reason I fell. That's what I suspected, my father said quietly. Your mother and I have been discussing this situation extensively. There's something else you need to know, Victoria. Something that happened while you were unconscious. Before he could continue, the door to my hospital room opened and Ethan walked in, carrying a coffee cup that he nearly dropped when he saw I was awake. His face transformed, relief and joy and something else, something that looked like guilt, all washing over his features at once. Vic, he breathed, using the childhood nickname he hadn't called me in years. You're awake. Really awake this time. This time? I echoed. You've had a few brief periods of consciousness, my father explained. But you weren't really coherent. The doctors said that's normal with brain injuries. Ethan approached my bed cautiously, like he wasn't sure of his welcome. He looked terrible, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot from what I assumed was lack of sleep. I'm so sorry, Vic. I'm so incredibly sorry. For what? I asked, though I had a growing suspicion. Ethan sank into the chair on the other side of my bed, his coffee forgotten on the side table. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. For letting Amanda drive a wedge between us. For not being there when you needed me. He paused, his voice breaking. For marrying someone who could say what she said about you. So he knew. He had heard Amanda's venomous words in the emergency room. I watched my brother struggle with his emotions, seeing the genuine anguish on his face, and felt a complicated mix of anger and sympathy. Tell me exactly what she said, I requested. I heard some of it, but I was fading in and out. I need to know all of it. Ethan and my father exchanged glances. My father nodded slightly, giving Ethan permission to continue. My brother took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly together. I got to the hospital about 20 minutes after you were brought in, he began. Amanda had called me, hysterical, saying there had been an accident. When I arrived, they told me you were being taken for a CT scan, that you had severe head trauma. I went to find Amanda in the waiting room, and she told me you'd slipped and fallen in the parking garage. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. She seemed upset, but not devastated. Not the way you'd expect someone to be after witnessing a serious accident. There was something off about her demeanor, but I was so focused on you that I didn't really process it at the time. Then they brought you back from imaging and took you into one of the trauma bays. Amanda and I followed, and that's when things went downhill fast. The doctors were saying you had significant bleeding in your brain, my father interjected. That you needed emergency surgery. We were all standing there, watching them work, and then your heart stopped. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. They started doing CPR. Everyone was moving so fast, shouting orders, pushing medications. It was chaos. And in the middle of all that, Amanda leaned over to me and said, maybe this is for the best. At least now there won't be any fights about the inheritance. I felt my breath catch despite the oxygen flowing through my nasal cannula. Even knowing what Amanda was capable of, hearing this was stunning. I thought I'd misheard her, Ethan continued, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I asked her what she meant, and she just shrugged and said something about how family estates always cause problems, and this would simplify things. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sister was dying right in front of us, and my wife was talking about inheritance. What did you do? I asked. I told her to shut up. I probably wasn't polite about it. She got defensive, started saying she was just being practical, that someone had to think about the family's future. I told her you were my future, that you were my family, and if she couldn't understand that, she could leave. My father picked up the narrative. That's when they got your heart started again, but you were still in critical condition. The neurosurgeon came out and explained that you needed immediate surgery to relieve the pressure in your brain. We all signed the consents, and they took you up to the OR. Amanda went with you? I asked, somehow already knowing the answer. No, Ethan said flatly. She said she couldn't handle watching me fall apart, that she was going home. I should have seen it then, should have recognized that her reaction was completely wrong. But I was so focused on you that I just let her go. The surgery took 6 hours, my father continued. When you came out, they put you in the ICU in a medically induced coma. The neurosurgeon said the next 72 hours would be critical. Ethan stayed here the whole time. Your mother and I went home to get some rest, but we came back first thing in the morning. Amanda didn't come back at all that first night, Ethan added. Or the next day. She texted saying she couldn't handle seeing you like that hospitals upset her. I was too exhausted and worried to really process how inappropriate that was. Then came the second night. He paused, and I could see him steeling himself for what came next. They started lightening your sedation, trying to see if you would wake up on your own. But instead of waking up, you crashed again. Your heart stopped a second time. The memory came back to me in vivid detail. The grayness, the sense of floating, the sounds of the medical team working frantically around my unresponsive body. And Amanda's voice, cutting through it all with crystalline cruelty. I was in the family waiting room when the code was called, Ethan said. I ran to your room, but they wouldn't let me in at first. Amanda had shown up about an hour before, and somehow she'd talked her way into the room. I could hear her through the door, and what she was saying made my blood run cold. Tell me, I said quietly. Ethan's face contorted with pain and rage. She was telling the doctors to stop. That you were already gone, that they were wasting their time and resources. Dr. Marcus, he's the one who was running the code, told her to step back. But she kept insisting, saying you wouldn't want to be kept alive artificially, that you told her as much. That's a lie, I said immediately. I never discussed anything like that with her. We barely spoke at all in the months before the accident. I know that now, Ethan said miserably. But at the time, I was in shock. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Then she said the thing that I'll never forget as long as I live. He had to stop, overcome with emotion. My father reached over and put a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. When Ethan could speak again, his voice was harsh with suppressed fury. She said, "She's not worth saving. She never was. You're wasting resources on someone who doesn't matter. Just let her go and stop this ridiculous charade." Those were her exact words. I heard them through the door, and for a moment, I couldn't believe it was my wife speaking. It sounded like a stranger. A monster. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my monitors. I processed this information, this confirmation of what I'd heard in my strange half-conscious state. Amanda hadn't just been indifferent to my death. She had actively tried to hasten it, to convince the medical team to abandon their efforts. What happened next? I finally asked. Dr. Marcus had security remove her from the room, Ethan said. I heard her screaming about her rights, about being family, but they got her out. And then I walked in and saw you on that table, saw them doing chest compressions, saw the defibrillator charging. I thought I'd lost you. I thought my wife's cruelty would be the last thing said over your body. But they didn't give up, I observed. No, my father said firmly. Dr. Marcus told us later that he's never given up on a patient based on a family member's say-so, especially when that family member is clearly not acting in the patient's best interest. He said there was something wrong about the whole situation, the way Amanda was behaving, and he trusted his instincts. They got your heart started again after about 12 minutes, Ethan continued. The longest 12 minutes of my life. When they finally stabilized you enough to step back, Dr. Marcus came over to me and asked point blank what my relationship with Amanda was and what her problem was with you. What did you tell him? The truth. That I didn't know. That until that moment, I thought my wife was just protective of our family interests, maybe a little paranoid about inheritance issues. But what I'd heard went so far beyond that. It was pure malice. He asked if there was any possibility that your fall wasn't an accident. This caught my attention. What did you say? Ethan met my eyes directly. I said I didn't know, but that I intended to find out. Dr. Marcus suggested we preserve the security footage from the parking garage before it was overwritten. He said given what he'd witnessed, he felt obligated to report the incident to hospital administration and possibly to the police. Did he? I asked. He did, my father confirmed. Hospital security pulled the parking garage footage. Your mother and I have seen it, Victoria. Amanda's story doesn't match what the video shows. A chill ran through me despite the warm hospital room. What does it show? My mother, who had been silent until now, spoke up from where she'd returned to stand by the window. It shows Amanda approaching you in an agitated state. It shows a confrontation, though there's no audio. It shows her lunging toward you, and you stepping back to avoid her. And then you falling and hitting your head. So it wasn't an accident, I said slowly. Not in the way she claimed. The police have reviewed the footage as well, my father said. They've classified it as assault, potentially aggravated assault given the severity of your injuries. Amanda has been charged. This was almost too much to process in my still foggy state. Charged? With what exactly? Assault in the second degree, Ethan said hollowly. The district attorney's office said that while Amanda didn't directly cause your fall, her actions created the circumstances that led to your injury. The fact that she then lied about what happened and tried to interfere with your medical care made the case stronger. Where is she now? I asked. Released on bail, my father said, his tone making clear what he thought of that decision. She's been ordered to stay away from you, from this hospital, and from any member of our family. If she violates the restraining order, she goes directly to jail. I lay back against my pillows, trying to absorb all of this information. My sister-in-law had assaulted me, lied about it, tried to convince doctors to let me die, and was now facing criminal charges. It seemed surreal, like something that happened to other people, not to ordinary families in Portland. Ethan, I said carefully, what are you going to do? He looked at me with haunted eyes. I've already filed for divorce. I moved out of our house the day after you woke up the first time. I'm staying with Mom and Dad until I can find my own place. You don't have to do that because of me, I protested weakly. This isn't just because of you, he said firmly. Though what she did to you would be more than enough reason. I've spent the last few days really examining my marriage, thinking about all the warning signs I ignored. Amanda didn't just reveal her true nature in that emergency room. She's been showing me who she is all along. I was just too blind or too stubborn to see it. My mother came over to stand beside Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. Amanda's attorney has been trying to contact us. She wants to offer a settlement to avoid trial. Her family is mortified by the whole situation. I don't want their money, I said immediately. Neither do we, my father agreed. But we do want justice. What she did was unconscionable. You could have died, Victoria. You nearly did die, twice. And she was hoping for it. The reality of that statement hung heavy in the air. I had been so close to death, closer than I'd ever come even in all my years working in critical care. And the person who should have been most concerned about saving me had instead been advocating for my demise. I want to understand why, I said quietly. I know she was worried about inheritance, about money, but people don't wish death on their family members just over financial concerns. There has to be more to it. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. There is more. Things I've learned since the accident. Things Amanda finally admitted when I confronted her before filing for divorce. Tell me, I urged. He took a deep breath. Amanda's family isn't as wealthy as she led me to believe. Her father is a surgeon, yes, but he's got massive debts from failed investments. Her mother's family money largely dried up a generation ago. The big house in the fancy neighborhood? It's mortgaged to the hilt. Amanda grew up with the appearance of wealth but not the reality of it. This was news to me, though it explained some of Amanda's obsessive concern about money and status. Go on, I encouraged. When we got married, Amanda saw our family, saw the printing business, saw the property and assets, and she thought she was marrying into real, sustainable wealth. She thought the business was worth several $1 million, that Mom and Dad's retirement accounts were substantial, that there was this huge inheritance waiting. But that's not reality, I said, understanding dawning. The business is successful, but it's not worth millions. And most of Mom and Dad's wealth is tied up in the business itself. Exactly, Ethan confirmed. When the business was transferred to me, Amanda finally got to see all the financial details. The real numbers. And she realized that while we're comfortable, we're not wealthy in the way she'd imagined. The business brings in a good income, but it also requires constant reinvestment. The property is valuable, but selling it would mean closing the business. She was disappointed, I said flatly. More than disappointed. She felt deceived, even though I'd never lied to her about our finances. She just built up this fantasy in her head and was furious when reality didn't match it. And then she fixated on the idea that if you weren't in the picture, if there was no possibility of you ever claiming any portion of the family assets, then what we did have would be entirely ours. My mother made a sound of disgust. That woman watched too many soap operas. The idea that Victoria was some threat to their financial security was completely absurd. I know that, Ethan said miserably. I should have shut down that kind of thinking from the beginning. Instead, I let Amanda's paranoia fester because it was easier than confronting the truth that my wife had married me at least partially for money that didn't actually exist. Did she admit all of this? I asked. Eventually. After the arrest, after I told her I was filing for divorce, she broke down and confessed everything. She said she'd convinced herself that you were playing the long game, pretending not to care about inheritance while secretly planning to swoop in and claim half of everything when Mom and Dad died. She said the idea consumed her, that she couldn't sleep thinking about it. So when the opportunity arose in that parking garage, my father said grimly, she saw a chance to eliminate what she perceived as a threat. She didn't plan it, Ethan clarified. At least that's what she claims. She says she went to the hospital to confront you, to demand that you sign some kind of legal document renouncing any claim to family assets. She'd been drinking because she was nervous. When she saw you walking to your car, she followed you into the garage. You tried to de-escalate, but she was drunk and emotional and things spiraled. And then I fell and hit my head, I finished. And instead of immediately calling for help, instead of showing any human compassion, she saw an opportunity. I'm so sorry, Vic, Ethan said, and I could see genuine anguish in his face. I brought this person into our family. I married someone capable of this level of cruelty. I'll never forgive myself for that. I reached out and took my brother's hand, squeezing it weakly. You didn't know. She fooled you, just like she would have fooled anyone. Sociopaths are good at that. The question now, my father said, is what happens next. The criminal case against Amanda will proceed regardless of what we want. But there are other decisions to make. Like what? I asked. Like whether you want to pursue a civil case for damages, my mother explained. Your medical bills are substantial. You'll need ongoing rehabilitation. You may have permanent effects from the brain injury. Amanda should be held financially responsible for that. I thought about it, about dragging this situation through civil court, about years of legal battles and confrontations. The idea was exhausting. But another part of me, the part that had heard Amanda's venomous words as I lay dying, wanted accountability. Let me think about it, I said finally. Right now, I just want to focus on recovery. That's wise, my father agreed. You've been through a tremendous trauma, both physical and emotional. Healing needs to be the priority. Over the following days, as I grew stronger and more alert, I began to piece together just how close I'd come to not making it. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Patricia Chen, explained that the bleeding in my brain had been life-threatening, that another few minutes without intervention could have resulted in permanent severe disability or death. You're remarkably lucky, she told me during one of her rounds. The fact that you were injured at the hospital where you work meant you got treatment immediately. And Dr. Marcus's refusal to give up when you coded probably saved your life. Dr. Marcus himself visited me several times. During one visit, he pulled up a chair beside my bed and spoke candidly about what he'd witnessed in the emergency room. I've been a physician for 20 years, he said. I've seen families make difficult decisions about end-of-life care. I've seen grief, shock, denial, anger, all of it. But what I saw from Amanda wasn't any of those things. It was cold calculation. She wasn't grieving. She was hoping. "Thank you for seeing that," I said sincerely. "For not listening to her." "It was my job," he replied. "But more than that, it was my duty to you as a patient. You're young, otherwise healthy, with every reason to fight for your life. I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, influence medical decisions based on what I could clearly see was malice rather than concern for your well-being." He paused, then added, "I've given a statement to the police about what I witnessed. If this goes to trial, I'll testify to exactly what Amanda said and how she behaved. What she did was unconscionable, and she needs to be held accountable." As the days passed and I continued to improve, I was moved from the ICU to a regular neurology floor, then eventually to the rehabilitation unit. My injuries had left me with some lingering effects, headaches, difficulty with concentration, some memory gaps around the time of the accident. The rehabilitation team assured me these symptoms would likely improve with time and therapy, but there were no guarantees. Throughout it all, my family was there. My parents visited daily, bringing fresh flowers and updates about the neighborhood. Ethan came every evening after work, often bringing dinner that we'd share while watching mindless television. Our relationship, strained for so long by Amanda's manipulation, was slowly healing alongside my physical wounds. But there was an elephant in the room that we'd been dancing around, and finally, during one of Ethan's evening visits, I decided to address it directly. "What's going to happen to the business?" I asked him. "With everything going on with Amanda, with the legal issues, are you able to manage?" Ethan set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "The business is fine. Actually, it's more than fine. Removing Amanda from my life has been like lifting a weight I didn't fully realize I was carrying. She was constantly pushing me to expand faster, take on more debt, chase bigger clients. Now I can run things the way Dad did, sustainably and carefully." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "That business is your legacy. You've earned it." He looked at me seriously. "Vic, I need you to know something. Whatever Amanda thought or feared, you were never a threat to my inheritance. Mom and Dad made their intentions clear from the beginning. The business goes to me because I've devoted my life to it, and that's fair. But they've also made provisions in their estate planning to ensure you're taken care of." "I don't need taking care of," I protested. "I have a good job, savings, my own life." "Let me finish," Ethan insisted gently. "They've set aside assets separate from the business, things that will come to you when the time comes. Not because you're entitled to half of everything, but because they want both their children provided for. It's all been properly documented, legally sound, completely fair." Amanda's paranoia was based on absolutely nothing, I observed. "Worse than nothing," Ethan agreed. "It was based on her own greed and insecurity projected onto you. She couldn't imagine someone not being motivated by inheritance and money, so she assumed you must be hiding your true intentions." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before I voiced the question that had been nagging at me. "Do you think she really wanted me dead? Or was it just a terrible thing said in the heat of the moment?" Ethan considered this carefully. "I've thought about that a lot. I want to believe it was just words, that she didn't really mean it. But the more I learn about who Amanda really is, the less certain I am. She's shown a capacity for cruelty that I never imagined. Whether she actively wanted you dead or just didn't care if you died, does it really matter? Either way, she revealed something fundamentally broken in her character." He was right, I realized. The distinction between actively wanting my death and being indifferent to it was meaningless in practical terms. Either way, Amanda had shown herself to be someone without basic human compassion, someone capable of watching another person die without grief or concern. "I'm divorcing her," Ethan continued. "No reconciliation, no second chances. Our lawyers are working out the settlement now. She'll get some assets from the marriage, but nowhere near what she thinks she deserves. And she'll have to live with the knowledge that her greed and paranoia cost her everything. How do you feel about that? I asked gently. He sighed deeply. Honestly? Relieved. Sad about the time I wasted, angry at myself for being so blind, but mostly just relieved. It's like waking up from a bad dream and realizing I get to start over. My rehabilitation progressed steadily over the following weeks. I relearned how to manage the headaches with medication and rest. I worked with occupational therapists to address the concentration issues. I spent hours in physical therapy, rebuilding the strength and coordination I'd lost during the weeks of bed rest and recovery. Throughout it all, I thought about Amanda's words, about the revelation of her true nature, about how close I'd come to dying without my family ever knowing the depth of her malice. It changed something fundamental in how I viewed relationships and trust. I'd always been someone who took people at face value, who believed in the basic goodness of others. Amanda had taught me that sometimes evil wears a beautiful mask. 6 months after the accident, I stood in the courthouse hallway waiting for Amanda's criminal trial to begin. The rehabilitation had been long and grueling, but I'd made a remarkable recovery according to Dr. Chen. The headaches were manageable now, occurring only occasionally. My concentration had returned to near normal levels, though I still struggled with fatigue when overstressed. Physically, I was back to work at the hospital, though in a reduced capacity while I continued to rebuild my stamina. The trial itself was mercifully brief. The security footage was damning, showing clearly that Amanda had initiated the confrontation that led to my fall. Multiple witnesses, including Dr. Marcus and other emergency room staff, testified about her behavior during my medical crisis. Her attempts to convince the medical team to stop resuscitation efforts were detailed in clinical, devastating testimony. Amanda's defense attorney tried to paint her as someone overcome with grief and shock, someone who hadn't known what she was saying. But the prosecution presented evidence of her obsession with inheritance, including emails she'd sent to her own family describing me as a threat to her financial security. Text messages to friends where she'd wished I would just disappear, so she and Ethan could have what was rightfully theirs. I sat in the courtroom and listened to all of it, this comprehensive documentation of another person's hatred for me. It was surreal and painful, but also strangely validating. I hadn't imagined the tension, hadn't been oversensitive to her coldness. It had all been real, and now everyone could see it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on assault in the second degree. Amanda's face crumpled when the verdict was read, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. She looked at Ethan, who sat on my side of the courtroom, but he didn't meet her eyes. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. It wasn't the maximum sentence, but the judge made clear that Amanda's actions after the assault, her attempts to interfere with medical care and her complete lack of remorse, had warranted real prison time rather than a suspended sentence. As Amanda was led away, she turned and looked directly at me for the first time since the trial began. I expected to see hatred or defiance, but instead, I saw something that looked almost like confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so completely. Outside the courthouse, my family gathered on the steps. My parents looked older but relieved that this chapter was finally closing. Ethan put his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that had become natural again over the past months. "It's over," he said simply. But it wasn't, not quite. There was still the civil case, the lawsuit my attorney had filed seeking damages for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. Amanda's family had offered a settlement almost immediately after the criminal conviction, clearly wanting to avoid further public humiliation. My attorney, a sharp woman named Caroline Henderson, had advised me to accept. "The settlement is substantial," she explained during our meeting the week after the criminal trial. "It covers all your medical expenses, compensates you for lost income, and provides additional funds for future care if your symptoms worsen." Fighting for more would mean years of litigation with no guarantee of a better outcome. I thought about it carefully, discussed it with my family, and ultimately agreed. The money wasn't the point. Accountability was, and Amanda had been held accountable both criminally and civilly. Dragging things out would only keep me tethered to this trauma when what I really wanted was to move forward. The settlement was finalized 2 months later. Amanda's parents, mortified by their daughter's actions, liquidated assets to pay it. I used a portion to establish a fund for brain injury research at the hospital where I worked, a way of turning something terrible into something potentially beneficial for future patients. Ethan's divorce was finalized around the same time. He'd moved into a small house not far from the print shop, a place that was entirely his own, free from the pretentious trappings that Amanda had insisted upon. I visited him there one Sunday afternoon, bringing Chinese takeout and beer. "How does it feel?" I asked as we sat on his back patio, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the trees. "Being officially free?" He considered the question. "Strange. Like I lost 3 years of my life to someone who never really existed. The woman I thought I married, the woman I fell in love with, she wasn't real. She was a performance designed to get what Amanda wanted." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "The marriage, I mean." "Parts of it," he admitted. "I regret the time wasted, the damage done to my relationship with you. But I can't regret the lessons learned. I know myself better now. I know what I'm willing to accept in a relationship and what I'm not. I'll never again ignore warning signs just because I'm afraid of being alone." We sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about the business. About expansion, not in the way Amanda wanted, but in a sustainable way. There's an opportunity to partner with a design firm, to offer more comprehensive branding services. Dad thinks it's a solid idea." "That sounds great," I said genuinely. "The business has always been your passion. It's good to see you able to focus on it again without all the noise and pressure." "What about you?" Ethan asked. "What's next for Victoria Reeves, survivor of the unsurvivable?" I smiled at the dramatic phrasing. "Back to work full-time next month. Dr. Chen cleared me for regular shifts. And I've been thinking about going back to school, getting certified in trauma counseling. Experiencing what I went through gave me a different perspective on patient care. I want to use that." "That's perfect for you," Ethan said warmly. "You always were meant to be a healer." My return to full-time work at the hospital was both exciting and nerve-wracking. My colleagues had been incredibly supportive throughout my recovery, but there was still an awkwardness in being back as a nurse in the same emergency room where I'd nearly died. Dr. Marcus made a point of welcoming me back personally, assigning me to work shifts with him when possible. "You're one of the best critical care nurses I've worked with," he told me during my first week back. "What happened to you doesn't change that. If anything, it probably makes you better at understanding what patients and families go through during medical crises." He was right. I found that my experience gave me unique insight into the fear and vulnerability that patients felt. I could speak to them not just as a medical professional, but as someone who had been where they were, who understood the terror of losing control of your own body, the strange detachment of serious trauma. One evening, about 8 months after the accident, I was working a shift when a woman was brought in after a car accident. She had significant head trauma, not unlike what I'd experienced. As I helped stabilize her, talking to her gently even though she seemed unconscious, I saw her hand twitch in response to my voice. "I know you can hear me," I told her softly. "I know you're in there, fighting to come back. Keep fighting. You're worth every effort we're making. You matter." The words felt significant, a direct repudiation of what Amanda had said about me. This patient mattered. Every patient mattered. And I would make sure they knew it. The woman survived, made a full recovery, and months later sent me a card thanking me for my care. She mentioned specifically that she remembered my voice during her trauma, that it had given her something to hold on to in the darkness. I kept that card in my locker at work, a reminder of why I'd chosen this profession, why I'd fought so hard to return to it. A year after the accident, my family gathered at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It was a smaller gathering than in previous years, just the 4 of us, but it felt complete in a way it hadn't in years. The shadow of Amanda was fading, becoming just an unfortunate chapter in our family history rather than a defining trauma. Over dinner, my father raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said. "To family, real family, the kind that stands together through the worst and comes out stronger. To second chances and new beginnings. And to Victoria, who taught us all something about resilience and grace. We clinked glasses, and I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. I'd survived something that should have destroyed me, both the physical trauma and the emotional betrayal. I'd heard the worst that could be said about me, heard someone wish for my death, and I'd fought my way back anyway. The experience had changed me in fundamental ways. I was warier now, less quick to trust, more aware of the potential for darkness in human hearts. But I was also stronger, more certain of my own worth, more committed to living a life of purpose and meaning. Amanda was released from prison after serving 13 months, granted early release for good behavior. I heard about it through Ethan, who still received occasional updates through the divorce attorneys. She'd moved to another state, her family having relocated in shame after the trial. I felt nothing when I heard the news, no anger or fear or even curiosity. She'd become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and resentment. 2 years after the accident, I completed my certification in trauma counseling and began volunteering at a support group for assault survivors. Sharing my story, helping others process their own traumas, felt like closing a circle. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I was determined to use it meaningfully. Ethan started dating again, cautiously this time, taking things slow with a woman he'd met through the business networking community. She was kind and genuine, with none of the polished fakery that had characterized Amanda. Watching him smile naturally again, seeing him relaxed and happy, was a gift. My parents eventually sold the family home and moved to a retirement community near the coast, finally embracing the rest they'd earned. The print shop continued to thrive under Ethan's leadership, proving that success didn't require the aggressive expansion and risk-taking that Amanda had pushed for. As for me, I learned to live with the scars, both visible and invisible. The slight depression in my skull where the surgery had been performed. The occasional headaches that reminded me how fragile life could be. The hypervigilance in parking garages that probably would never fully go away. But I also learned that survival wasn't just about making it through the initial trauma. It was about choosing, every day, to build a life worth the effort that had been made to save it. It was about proving wrong everyone who'd ever suggested you weren't worth the fight. Amanda had been wrong about so many things. Wrong about inheritance and family and my supposed threat to her security. But she'd been most wrong about my worth. I was worth saving. I was worth the 12 minutes of chest compressions, worth Dr. Marcus's refusal to give up, worth every painful day of rehabilitation. And every day I lived well, every patient I helped, every person I counseled through their own trauma, was proof of that worth. Amanda's hatred hadn't destroyed me. If anything, it had clarified what mattered: family who chose to stand by you, work that gave life meaning, and the fierce determination to prove that kindness and compassion were stronger than greed and malice. The woman who had flatlined twice, who had heard her death wished for by someone who should have wanted her to live, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood both the fragility and the resilience of the human spirit. Someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that she was worth every breath she took. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.